Good day guys, this is Sir NG Javier and welcome back to another episode of Creative Writing 101. In our previous episodes, we talked about poetry, its elements, and some tips on how we can write one. This time, we'll go to another genre of creative writing, that is fiction. But what is fiction? The word fiction came from the Latin word fictus, which means to form or to create. That's why if you look closely to the actual definition of fiction, you'll see that it says a product of someone's imagination. Because a fiction is simply something that is just made of. However, remember that some fictional works may appear real because they are inspired by real-life events. Fiction can be found in different media, like in performances, in plays, in movies, and in writing like short stories, novels, and dramas. And to understand fiction better, it is important that one is aware of its elements. These are probably familiar to you as you possibly have encountered this in your previous subjects. Let's begin with the most basic one, that is the setting, also known as the atmosphere. Before we begin discussing this, please note that setting is different from the word settings. Setting is the element we're going to talk about here, while settings refer to the customization menu you can find in your phone. Okay, going back, the setting is simply the time and place when and where the story took place. Do we have to discuss this further? Okay, just remember that the setting answers these questions. Now let's go to the next element, that is the characters. The characters are figures in the story which can be persons, animals, creatures, or even things. They are the actors in the story moving the plot line through their dialogues and courses of actions. There are actually a lot of types of characters, but let's categorize them according to focus, characterization, and character development. The first types of characters are based on focus. How focused is the story on these characters? The first type is the major characters. There are two kinds of major characters. We have the protagonist and the antagonist. The protagonist, who is the main character in the story, is someone who is of moral personality usually, like Romina and Cassie from Cadenang Ginto. On the other hand, the antagonist is also a main character, but the antagonist is someone in conflict with the protagonist. This may be because they have different attitudes, different beliefs, or different goals, like Daniela and Marga from Cadenang Ginto as well. And we have the minor characters who are, of course, extra characters in the story, meaning they are not focused well, like they are just additional characters to support the main characters. The second types of characters are based on character development. If you're wondering what character development is, character development means the change of behavior, attitude, or personality of the characters as the story goes. The first type of character based on character development is the static character. From the word static, it means that the character is stagnant. The character did not change personality or attitude throughout the story. Like common villains in stories like Congressman Argente of Wildflower. Opposite to this is the dynamic character. From the word dynamic, this means that the character goes through changes of personality or character throughout the story. Remember Lily Cruz from Wildflower, who became Ivy Aguas later on in the story to take revenge to the Ardientes? Once again, those are characters based on character development, the static and the dynamic. Finally, the last types of characters are based on characterization. Characterization means how well did the author give characteristics to these characters. The first type is the round character. From the word round, it means that the character is complete, is a complete person. The character showcases a variety of attitudes and personalities. Imagine it like a 3D figure which you can see details from different angles. It means that the character is round. The character is sometimes mad, the character is sometimes good, the character is sometimes bad. So the character gives you a round kind of personality, a complete set of attitudes or personality. Example of round characters could be the siblings in Prima Donnas. Donna Marie, Donna Belle, and Donna Lynn. All of them are kind, they are sweet, but they also know when to fight back whenever they think it is needed. On the other hand, we have the flat characters. The flat characters are like 2D images. You can only see one side of the character's personality. So usually these characters are the extra or the minor characters, like the loving grandmother, the bad villain who is always bad. So one-sided personality. And an example of a flat character is Kendra, who is always bad, always mad, always greedy of wealth. Once again, these are the types of characters based on characterization. How well are they characterized in the story? Our third element is the point of view, or POV as we call it. The point of view basically refers to how the story is told. I mean, who is telling the story? We have 4 types of point of view. The first one is the first person point of view. The first person point of view means that the story is told by the character, him or herself. That's why the pronouns I, my, me, myself are always used in this point of view. Look at this example. You see, the narrator is telling a story about himself. The next point of view is the second person point of view. This is rarely used in stories because unlike the first person point of view where the narrator talks about his or her story, the second person point of view tells the story as if you, the reader, is the one experiencing it. Look at this example. You see, the pronouns used are you, your, yourself, because the narrator is telling the story as if you are the one experiencing it. And finally, we have the third person point of view, which has 2 types. In the third person point of view, this is no longer about the narrator, this is no longer about you as the reader, but about a different character or a different set of characters. This is the most commonly used point of view in stories because it's the most convenient one to use. However, you have to remember that there are 2 types of third person point of view. We have the third person limited and the third person omniscient. From the word limited, the third person limited means that the narrator can only tell about the character's actions and can only tell about the inner thoughts of one character, that is, the protagonist. On the other hand, the third person omniscient means that the narrator is all-knowing, meaning the narrator can talk about the actions of all the characters and even the thoughts or the inner thoughts of every character in the story. Once again, this third person point of view is the most used point of view because it's the most convenient one to use. Our next element is the plot. The plot is simply the sequence of events in the story, and there are 5 parts of the plot. The first part is the exposition. It's like the introduction of the story. It is where the setting and the characters are introduced. Like the common fairy tale introductions we read before, saying, long time ago, in a faraway kingdom, there lived a beautiful princess named Snow White. So, the setting is introduced, the character is introduced. The second part is the rising action. From the word rising, this means that the story's events are beginning to rise in terms of interest. Why? Because this is the part where the conflict is being introduced and the events begin to become more intense. Back to the story of Snow White, the rising action there is when the evil queen sees Snow White as a problem she wants to eliminate. Third part is the climax. This is the highest point of the story. It's because it's the most interesting part of the story. Why? Because this is the moment when the protagonist or the characters begin to face the conflict. Like in Snow White, it is when Snow White encountered the evil queen and ended up eating the poisonous apple. Then we go to the fourth part, that is the falling action. The falling action occurs when the actions of the characters in the climax begin to show its consequences or resolutions. As in Snow White, the falling action there is when the prince kissed her and she woke up from her death. Finally, we have the fifth part, and that is the resolution, the ending of the story. The resolution is the conclusion of the story, which may either be a happy ending or a tragic ending. Again, as in Snow White, they were told to live happily ever after. Our fifth element is the conflict. The conflict is simply the problem of the story. And remember, the conflict is where the story revolves around. Many people think that the characters are where the story goes around, but a story is always about a conflict and how the characters will act to solve the problem. There are different types of conflict. The first one is the man versus man. This is when the struggle is between two characters. Like the common stories we see, where we have a protagonist and an antagonist. The second type is the man versus nature. It is when the struggle is between a character and nature. like animals or natural occurrences. Remember the movies The Meg and 2012? Those are examples of this. The third type is the man versus society. It's when the struggle is between the character and the distorted norms of the society, like in Hunger Games. Fourth, we have the man versus self, wherein the struggle is between the character and him or herself. Common examples of this are Rodora X and Spider-Man 3. And finally, the fifth type is the man versus fate, which obviously means that the protagonist is trying to evade the hands of his or her destiny, like in the Final Destination movies where they try to escape their deaths. Next element is the theme. Like the theme of other literary genres, the theme here simply means the general idea or the main topic of the story. And remember, a story can have a combination of themes like revenge, family, romance, or whatsoever. And finally, the last element we'll be talking about here is the moral. The moral is the lesson that we can get from the story. This can be directly stated in the story, or this can be something that the readers will have to realize themselves as they read the story. So we are done discussing the elements. Now let's go and discuss the literary techniques or literary devices we can use to make our fiction more effective. The first ones are the tone and mood. Like the tone and mood in other literary genres, the tone simply refers to the narrator's attitude towards the topic. Is the narrator mad? Is the narrator happy, or is he confused? Mood, on the other hand, is about the readers. As a reader, how do you feel about the story? Or what atmosphere does the story give you? Is it scary? Is it suspenseful? Is it thrilling or chilling or saddening? The next literary device is the foreshadowing. This is a technique in which a narrator tells an event, introduces a person or a character, or gives a chunk of information that indicates that something might happen later on in the story. This is like a signal or a premonition. Remember when Harry Potter bought his wand and the seller Ollivander told him that the wand chooses its wizard, and that Harry's wand is actually brothers with that of Voldemort. At first, we did not understand why, but later we learned that that scene actually foreshadowed the truth that Harry and Voldemort became connected after their first encounter. Once again, foreshadowing is about giving signals to your readers about what could happen later on in the story. The third literary device is symbolism and motif. Symbolism is the use of symbols like objects, situations, events, actions, or even persons to represent ideas. Example, a character is holding a picture of his ex-girlfriend. This could symbolize that the character is not yet capable of moving on from that relationship, and that that character cannot let go of his past. Once again, that is symbolism. On the other hand, the motif is a recurring object or a repeating pattern of events in the story. Remember Detective Conan? The motive there is crimes and revelation of truth. As Detective Conan always encounters a crime and always tries to find out the who's, the why's, the what's, and the how's of the crimes that happened. Finally, the last literary technique is the irony. This technique shows contrast or differences from what we expect to happen to what actually happens in the story. There are three types of irony. The first type is the verbal irony. The verbal irony happens when characters say something that is opposite to what they actually think or feel. Common example of this is when a character denies his or her feelings towards another character in the story. Again, the verbal irony is when a character says something that is different from what he or she actually feels or thinks. The second type of irony is the situational irony. It is when the result of a situation is different from what you expect to happen in the story. Simply put, it's the plot twist. Remember the movie Coco, where we did not expect that Hector, the sad musician, was actually Miguel's great-grandfather and not Ernesto de la Cruz. Again, a situational irony. And finally, the third type is the dramatic irony. It is when you, as a reader, knows a key piece of information that the character or the characters in the story do not know. It's like when we're watching thriller movies and we know that the killer is already hiding in the comfort room, but the character does not know it, so the character will still go to that comfort room. Again, that's dramatic irony. That's it. Once again, these are the elements of fiction, and these are the literary devices in fiction. Be sure to remember and understand these elements and these techniques so you can easily analyze fiction and maybe write your own later on. Once again, thank you for staying with me until the end of this video. Please make sure to subscribe to this channel so you would be updated of our next episodes. This has been Sir NG Javier, and this is Creative Writing 101.